of being Kalat Bereishit. Yeah, well, it's still the week of Bereishit. But you're not wearing your laurels.
It's really hard to drive while wearing them.
I wouldn't have thought of that, actually. Is it get down in front of the eyes, or just it's distracting on the head, or bumping on the headrest?
Yeah, bumping on the headrest.
Yeah. That was something I had to learn when I first began wearing a ponytail. Because I first began wearing a ponytail when I was in England, and I wasn't driving. And when I came back, I suddenly realized I had to adjust the headrest, or I kept bumping that thing on the back of my head.
Yeah. I ended up
Little
adjusting
problems.
where the ponytail was.
Little problems.
But yeah.
But we're going to talk about how little problems can become big problems. How's that for a segue? As we begin the whole cycle of the Torah again, here in the year 5776, we're going to go back to the very first brothers, Cain and Abel, right? Cain and Hevel, these two lovely boys that don't always play nice. And we'll see what happens. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. And again, I apologize for the lateness of our start, but let's get to work. So we are on page 24. And this is chapter 1 of the book of Genesis, the book of Bereishit.
24 is chapter 4.
What did I say?
Chapter 1.
Sorry, chapter 4, verse 1. It's important that the words that come out of my mouth match the words that are in my head.
24.
Page 24. Come on in.
I gotta get keep up.
Oh, okay. Don't we have any spare in here? Okay. So we are on page 24, chapter 4, verse 1. All right, now let's dive into the story. We are going to do the whole story with minimum commentary, and then we're going to go back and put the commentary in order to... It's cooling. The air conditioner was off. Yes, rather than in holding position. So it was a little warm when we started, but it's cooling down now.
Okay. Maybe we should talk with church to just leave it at 72.
No, 78. 78 is fine.
78,
Yeah, there's just when they turn it off, then the air just it's like being in a pyramid. I want my mummy. Okay. All righty. Oh, and we're doing handouts. Look at that. Those are pre-handouts, not mine. Those are for day of learning later in the month. Okay. So we're going to run through the story of Cain and Abel with minimum digressions. Thank you. I've already got the advanced copy. And then we're going to come back in and add the commentaries to help unpack this short but very dense narrative. Good. Need a volunteer. All right, Judy. Well, that's one reason why you got honored, was because you always volunteer.
Yes, I try to wait a beat or two and see if somebody else volunteers.
Which is nice, yes.
Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gained a male child with the help of the Lord. She then bore his brother Abel. Abel became a keeper of sheep, and Cain became a tiller of the soil.
All right, so just real pause, make sure we're paying attention to the details here. We've got two boys, right? Cain and Abel. Who's the eldest?
Cain.
Cain was born first, then Abel. And what are their jobs?
Shepherd and farmer.
Shepherd and farmer. Which is which?
Cain was a shepherd.
Cain was a shepherd? You sure about that?
No, it's the other way around.
I'm sorry. Abel was a shepherd.
Exactly. So what happens there in that verse is that they reverse the order of the brothers when they explain what they do, and from the order of that they were born. So it's really easy to get them mixed up, but it's good to know who was who. So Abel is a shepherd and Cain is a farmer. Good. Onward.
In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the soil, and Abel, for his part, brought the choicest of the firstlings of his flock. The Lord paid heed to Abel and his offering, but to Cain and his offering he paid no heed. Cain was much distressed, and his face fell. All
right, so what happens? These are the first people to bring sacrifices to God that we know of. Right? We don't know exactly what would have happened with Adam and Eve, but this is the first known sacrifice taking place. And what happens from the two young men, or old men, depending upon how you want to read the story? Cain brings
Cain
what?
brings something,
Well,
some fruit of the soil.
he brings fruit of the soil, something that's been grown from his agricultural work. And Abel brings
The choicest
of the firstlings of his flock. Okay, we're going to come back to that. And what does God seem to think of these?
He likes lamb better.
Apparently, he's not a vegetarian, right? So God prefers the offering of Abel and doesn't like so much, or doesn't show any preference for the offering of Cain. Okay, so far? All right, we're going to come back to why there was a distinction when we go through the commentaries and analyze this. And so Cain is upset, right? Cain is upset.
And the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you distressed, and why is your face fallen? Surely if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do right, sin couches at the door. Its urge is toward you, yet you can be its master."
All right. So God gives Cain a little pep talk. Why are you upset? Right? Why is your face fallen? Now, the obvious answer would be, why is Cain upset?
Years being cut short.
Yeah, because it was short, right? Didn't work. Right? God didn't like my offering. So how can God be asking Cain, why are you upset, when in some ways it's God's fault? Right? God is the one who didn't show favor to Cain. That's why Cain's upset. It's kind of galling, isn't it, for God to be asking him why he's upset? It's like, why are you upset? Just because I said I didn't like your birthday present? Which means if we're going to read this with God not just being a stupid human, we have to see that there's a deeper meaning to the question, which comes immediately, of course, by the answer, which is that Cain did something wrong. Right? Cain did something wrong. We may not have caught it when we went through, but Cain has done something wrong, and God is saying, yes, but you can fix it. Right? That's the idea of this uplift. So why are you upset? Doesn't mean why are you upset. It's why are you still upset? You did something wrong. Here's how you can fix it. And yes, life is going to be tricky because sin is always there waiting for you, but you can win. It's the halftime pep talk, right? First half was lousy. Why was it lousy? Because you didn't play so well, but you can still win this game.
Yeah, Rabbi, I feel like I'm almost reading this for the first time, because the way it hits me is it just speaks to such a key aspect of human nature in the following way. If a parent or a teacher says to either a student or their child, look, you didn't measure up in this regard, okay? And the child or the student starts getting very upset, maybe even blaming the parent, blaming the teacher, making excuses, right? And if the parent or the teacher then simply says to them, look, this is within your control to fix. Right. You just need to study a little harder. If you need help, I'll show you how to study. Or saying to the child, look, we've talked about this before in terms of your brother's toys. You can't, you can't just throw them against the wall. Right. And so where it strikes me just so much of human nature, I mean, this whole phenomena for us human beings, I include myself in this. Okay.
You are human, yes.
I'm getting adverse feedback or feedback that we don't want. Right. And then having the temptation at the very least to externalize it, blame others, blame the circumstances, rather than just taking responsibility as to how can I improve. It's never struck me just how kind of clear that sort of is in here.
All the way from the very first state of human to human conflict. Remember, the beginning of the book of Bereishit is about human-God conflict, right? And human versus the world conflict. Here we have the first instance of human versus human conflict, or really human versus human. There's a little bit between Adam and Eve about the whole "she told me to do it" nonsense. But here we get the first extended conflict between two people. And exactly, the conflict is, are you going to be focused on how poorly you did compared to him? Or are you going to recognize that you did poorly in its own objective sense, but that's not permanent. It's always fixable. Right? That's one of the greatest lessons that comes out of the story of Cain and Abel, is that God is saying, yes, you're going to mess up. Cain did first time out, but he could fix it. Unfortunately, because we've all read the book, we know he doesn't take that option. Because there's another way. If some other person has wrecked the curve on the test and you ended up with a D because some smarty pants got all the answers, if you want to get a better grade on the next test, you could either study harder or you can fix the curve. And that's the road we're going.
Cain said to his brother Abel, and when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him.
And yes, the sentence is exactly that elliptical in the middle. And we're going to come back to that ellipse in our commentary.
The Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Then he said, "What have you done? Hark, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Therefore you shall be more cursed than the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. If you till the soil, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall become a ceaseless wanderer on the earth."
All right, pause there. So, was Cain punished in the beginning with the whole sacrifice thing?
Not unless you consider God telling him you did it wrong, learn to fix it, as punishment.
All right, so we have a scale, and I think I've drawn this maybe a few hundred times now in my rabbinic career, right, where basically Abel, L-E or E-L? How do they normally spell it? E-L. Okay. Just call him Hevel, which is a lot easier to do. He goes up with his sacrifice, right? This is, let's call it God's favor, right? Abel goes up with his sacrifice, whereas Cain just sort of sits at level 0. And then when Cain murders, he goes down, right? So Cain didn't get punished for his poor sacrifice. He just wasn't rewarded for it. Rather than seeking the reward, he, of course, decides to fix the problem, which then leads to the punishment. And it's that progression between a low-level issue that is made worse by our reaction to it that is going to become sort of has become sort of the crux of the story. It wasn't his poor sacrifice that made the problem. It was how he responded to it that makes the problem. And of course, I think we all agree, Abel would agree with that most.
Are we going to discuss anything about their upbringing and how they got along as children?
If you'd like. What's that?
And how old they were at this point?
If you'd like, we can bring in a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about their birth to start, and maybe we can do a little tangent on that at that point. Okay, so handouts are around. So first of all, we have to talk about their birth. Because we get this very interesting phrase that the JPS translation completely ruins. In the Hebrew of verse 1, it says, V'hadam yada et Chava ishto. All right, everyone sees we're back on verse 1, right? Which means, and the man, or the Adam, probably the man in this case, because it's got the definite article, which means it's a title rather than a proper name. Yada. Anyone here remember their Hebrew class? What does yada mean? Well, to know, but conjugate the verb. Yodea would be knows. Yada would be knew. All right. If we were dealing with wonderful modern Hebrew, yada means he knew. And indeed, the JPS translation has given us exactly, and the man knew his wife Eve. There's a problem with that, as Rashi, based on Sanhedrin and Hebrew grammar from the biblical period, is going to point out. Judy, would you mind reading our first little Rashi comment there on the handout?
The knowing took place prior to the above episode, before he sinned and was banished from the Garden of Eden.
All right, so what does knowing mean in the Bible? I'm not going to make these. All right, intimacy.
Yeah, making babies.
Yeah,
Trying to make babies.
exactly. It's the act that eventually can lead to conception and birth, right? It is the intimacy between husband and wife. So the knowing took place before the previous episode, before the expulsion of Eden. Huh? But it's not written before that took place, right? We had, they were made, tree was there, they ate the tree, they got kicked out. Chapter 4, the man knew his wife. How in the world can Rashi believe that this happened before the previous chapter? Right? Because he's basically saying that this has been written out of order. Doesn't sound like that in English, right? I went to the store, I bought some pears, I knew what time it was. You wouldn't assume that knowing what time it was happened before I got the pears. Right? That's not the way grammar works, which is why the mistranslation is so frustrating. Keep reading.
Also, the conception and the birth, for if it were written,
Vayeda Adam.
it would mean that after he had been banished, he had sons.
All right, so there's this wonderful phrase, there's this wonderful type of grammar in biblical Hebrew called vav hachipuch, which means the flipping vav. What happens is that when a vav comes before what is called the imperfect, in modern Hebrew, what we would call the future tense, it makes the imperfect, the future tense, a past tense verb. And you'll notice that the subject of the verb comes after the verb, right? Vayeda Adam, and new man. I remember we're using new in not like new, like shiny new, but knowing now. So here, the subject comes before the verb. The verb is in this other form, yada, which in biblical Hebrew is the indicator of what in English we call the past perfect. Everyone remember their English grammar class? Okay. So this is what we call the past, right? I knew it. Past perfect. Perfect. That's good enough. In English, we would write had known. If you were going to write this correctly in English, sorry, JPS, according to the very clear markers that both Rashi and other biblical scholars of grammar have made clear over the centuries, right up until modern biblical Hebrew scholars, they should have written, and the man had known his wife Eve. Because that's what the indicators are here. We have yada rather than vayeda, and we have the subject coming before the verb rather than after the verb. Which means all the hanky-panky happened before the fruit and before the expulsion. This may seem like a trivial point of grammar, but it's rather significant theologically, because it means the intimacy between Adam and Eve is part of the nature of creation. It is not an after effect of the fall, of the expulsion. Right? Children, intimacy, all of that is part of how we were made. It is not a result of the expulsion, right. Which means it's not bad. Sex is not after sin. Sex was before sin.
Right, which obviously was an interpretation that other religions have placed.
Correct. And even within our own tradition, there have been people who have sometimes looked down upon intimacy as being post-Eden. And this is very clearly in the grammar, in the Hebrew, saying, no, it was pre-expulsion. Okay, let's move on, because that is not the main point. I just wanted, because it gets so much misunderstanding, I just wanted to make sure we touched on it before we missed it, because we don't get to talk about Cain and Abel every year.
Hey, Rabbi,
yeah.
I know you want to move on, but when it also says, I have gained the male child with the help of the Lord, does that also imply that the birth was painless?
Coming up to that.
Okay, great.
One more comment, and then we get to that one. So first of all, we pick up on the interesting phrase, and he knew her, and she conceived, and she bore, and then we talk about his name, and then we see in verse 2, she bore another kid. And Genesis Rabbah, Bereishit Rabbah, is going to point out that there's a bit of an issue here.
that she bore without mentioning conception implies an additional birth, but not pregnancy. That is, they were twins.
Okay. Notice very carefully. It says he knew, she conceived, she bore Cain and gave him this name, and she bore Abel. The fact that the conceive and bore doesn't get repeated for Abel, according to a close reading by Genesis Ralba, means these guys were twins. How do you bear two kids with only one conception mentioned? Twins. It's the only way it happens. What's that? Amazing. Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you read, which is why I bless our sages every day, because one of the best skills they ever taught me was read. That it's actually there in the words. Yeah, read it more than once even, and ask, well, wait, why is that word there or not there? And by the way, that's a wonderful technique to also use when talking with other people. Although we don't call it reading, then we call it listening. Hear the words they say, not the words you think they say, or not thinking about the words you're going to say once they finally shut up and let you have a turn. Listening. It's the same as reading with your ears. Okay, so we've got twins now. And how did these kids get born? Now we're coming back to Paul's question.
From now on, it shall be neither man without woman, nor woman without man, nor both without the Shekhinah.
Okay, so what does she say when she says that this is kind, right? This idea that I have acquired a male with the help of the Lord. This is making a theological statement that it's not that a man can have kids on his own and a woman can have kids on her own, or even that a man and a woman can have kids on their own. It takes the two of them plus God, right? That every child has three parents, so to speak, involved in this process. And she is acknowledging that this is not just being made out of nothing, like both she and Adam were made, but it is being made out of each other, but still made with God's help. Right? And the miracle of God creating new life through parents is no less miraculous than God creating life by forming dirt or using a bone. Make sense? Okay, so was it painless or not painless? It doesn't really go in. Certainly the statement of the banishment was that childbirth was going to be uncomfortable, and we would expect that that was likely still continuing. But we have these kids now as twins. We have them both old enough to eventually sacrifice. And we have both of them old enough to choose their path in life. One has chosen to be a farmer and the other has chosen to be a shepherd. We're not looking at teenagers here. We're definitely looking at full adult people. And certainly that's the way the rabbinic tradition has always looked at them. When we look later on about what they're fighting over, these are the concerns of adults, not the concerns of children. So if that somewhat frames your question. I don't know if there's another tradition that you're remembering that you'd like to share, or... Right, yeah. So definitely our tradition views these as being two adult men and fighting. And as we're going to see,
the only question was, did they get along as children? And I don't know if there's a midrash that talks
about getting along with children. I'm trying to think. I don't remember seeing any.
Always tension between.
I don't remember seeing a midrash that talked specifically about their relationship with each other as children. I'd have to go look that up. That's good. It's
it seems so. I can't think of the word I want, but without any precedent. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's not just that he beats him up, he gives him a hard time, he kills him.
Yes. And we're going to come back to kind of where this came from, that it's not out of nowhere. Indeed, we already know that it's crouching at the door. That the root cause, the rabbis are going to try and teach us of all of this spiraling out of control is because of the internal impulses that are with us from the beginning, from the door. That is to say, from birth, we have impulses which lead us in certain directions if they are not controlled, if they are not properly made to serve us rather than we end up following them. So that's going to come back again and again and again. So the rabbis certainly don't see this as coming out of nowhere. And they didn't have to have a relationship or strife to end up with murder.
I mean, this may be a big extrapolation, but the idea that human beings vent their personal frustration on people they don't know is not unique. Like you take the pogroms,
Mhm.
right? Russian peasants are struggling, something happens, it makes their life more difficult. They decide to blame Jews down the block who they don't even know.
Although most violence is still perpetrated by people who know the victim.
Yes.
Right? Most violence is still done by people who know their victim. It's sad, but unfortunately still true. All right, so let's find out what the problem was. That's going to be our thrust for the rest.
Cain brought the inferior crops. He is like a bad tenant who eats the first ripe figs, but honors the king with the late ones.
Apparently the first figs are good. I'm not a fig farmer, but I'll take the sage's word for it. Or devar acher, another thing.
Another thing, of the fruit from whatever was at hand, not the best.
Right, so maybe it wasn't that he brought the worst ones, but he just sort of gathered up whatever he was going to offer and offered. He wasn't selecting the best to give. Now, why in the world would Rashi or Bereishit Rabbah think that Cain didn't bring the best? Close reading again.
Only because it didn't say that he did.
But it did say what with regard to his brother?
He brought
It
the
did say
best.
That he brought his best, exactly. So if you look over in verse 4, right? Abel for his part brought the choicest of the firstlings of his flock. If the text knows how to say that one person brought the best of the best, and it doesn't mention what the other person brought, you can pretty much assume the other person didn't bring the best of their best. Right? It's kind of like what we might say in English, being damned by faint praise. Right? So, you have two people who both went and did some performance, and someone asks you how they did, and you say, oh, Bob was amazing. He really did an excellent job. And they say, and how was Tom? Tom was there. Right? That you can't just say that without implying a rather sharp contrast between Bob and Tom. If the words don't come, there is something lacking, because we have words. We know we've got words. We've already used them for the other guy. Okay, so that's the first mistake that Cain makes. Is he doesn't bring his best. Right? He doesn't bring his A game. And that's what sets off the differentiation between God's reaction between him and his brother. But it's what happens afterwards that is a problem. But that first lack is considered an avera, or at least a chet, right? This is a mistake. If you were to bring a sacrifice in the temple days that was inferior or that was blemished, it's considered to be inappropriate. It's a sin. It's not an intentional sin, most likely, unless you were deliberately finding the worst you could, but it is still a unwitting sin, right? It's what we call bishkaga, right? It's what's the right word? Accidental, I guess, is the best English word. What's that? Unintentional and accidental, right? It's definitely different than what we call mezid, which is a willful transgression or a willing sin. So you begin with this accidental, casual, almost beside the point transgression, which our sages are going to point out is, yeah, that's how it begins. So from Rabbi Akiva,
at first, sin is like a spider's thread, but eventually becomes like a ship's rope. Woe to them that draw sin with trifling cords and sin with a cart rope. Right?
So you draw sin with a trifling cord, and it eventually becomes the rope of a cart. Right? So Rabbi Akiva is saying this. He sinned a little with this mistaken sacrifice. But look where that little sin ended up taking him. Right? Yeah, that was easy. You could have fixed that, no problem. But the sin of murder, you don't fix that quite so easily. And Rabbi Yitzchak responds similarly.
At first it is like a visitor, then a guest, and then the master of the house.
That is to say, sin. Right? At first it's just a passing visitor. Then it becomes a welcomed guest, and then it becomes the person in charge. And he gives this wonderful line from Samuel dealing with the issue of David and Bathsheba, which if you haven't read that story, that's on your to-do list.
There came a traveler to a rich man, and he was reluctant to take from his own herd to prepare for the guest. So he prepared it for the man that had come.
Right, and then this little ellipse there, which I apparently forgot to put in, that he then took and stole the lamb from his neighbor who was poor, and he prepared that for the man who came. And again, Rabbi Yitzchak, very careful reader. There was a traveler, prepare for the guest, gave for the man. Traveler, guest, man. Traveler is the visitor, the wayfarer. Guest is somebody that's actually now a guest in the house. And man without title, he has become the Baal Habayit. He has become the master of the house. So just in that one little episode of David's life, we see sin becoming ever more prevalent in this action that David commits. And of course, from the story of Bathsheba, he looks upon a woman that he shouldn't be looking at while she's having a bath. And that leads him to then commit adultery, which then leads him to commit murder. Right, so sin becomes to dominate his household because of that initial impropriety as he's voyeuristically watching this woman have her bath. And Rabbi Abba Bar Yehuda.
It is like a decrepit robber who sits at the crossroads and orders every passerby to surrender his belongings until a shrewd person, thank you, comes and sees that he is feeble and beats him off.
Right, so here's the result that we're supposed to be taking from these verses that as God responds to Cain, which is you can be the master. So yes, sin is there, but sin is weak when it starts. And if you don't listen to it, you can push it away. Just like some guy who's pretending to be this mighty robber, but if you look at him closely, he's not anybody to be afraid of. Just because he says, give me your wallet. If you can push him over with one finger, you don't have to give him your wallet. Sin masquerades as being a tough guy, but in fact, you can beat him. Make sense? Okay. So if it was so easy, what were they fighting about? What could possibly have made Cain blind to the fact that he was able to defeat this temptation? And that's where we're heading now. Bereishit Rabbah.
What were they fighting about? They said, let's divide up the world.
Right? There's only two kids. Right, so they own the world. And if they own the world when their parents die, they're going to have to divide the world, right? That's what inheritance is. So here's one way they could do it.
One took the earth and one took the movable objects.
Right, so here's the deal. You take all the real estate and I'll take all the stuff. Sound fair? Right? That's enough for either of us, of course.
One said, that land that you are standing on is mine. And the other said, what you are wearing is mine. One said, take it off. And the other said, fly.
Okay, so what were they fighting about?
Power.
Again, you can't really divide the earth up that way.
Well, no, but we do, don't we? Don't you have your stuff and I have my stuff? Don't we fight a great deal about who owns what? Right? Don't we fight about stuff in the sense of, money or wealth or possessions or whatever you want to call it, or who owns which piece of land? Isn't that one of the major causes of strife in all of human history? Why would we think that the first two guys in the world wouldn't have that same problem? Right, so whether or not they were actually fighting about the land or clothes or what is kind of immaterial. What's important is that the rabbis are pointing out this is one of the main causes of fights in general. And their fight is so silly. What? Fly, take off your clothes because I own that? We should also think that our fights about this stuff, about material possessions and property, are also pointless and silly. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have stuff. It's okay to own things. The rabbis are very clear about that. But to fight, to be willing to kill someone, to have that hatred that lets you actually take a life, it's ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as telling someone that they have to fly, rather because you own the land they stand on. But that's not the only explanation of what they were fighting on.
Rabbi Joshua of Sichnis, in the name of Rabbi Levi, one said, the temple will be built in my territory, and the other said, the temple will be built in my territory. As it is written, when they were in the field, and field can refer only to the temple.
All right, there's a little proof text brought for that, but just roll with me for the time's sake. So what are they fighting about? Location of the temple, which if we were going to condense that into a category of strife, but it's not just land. They were already arguing about that.
Religious power.
Religion, right? So we're talking here about either religion or piety or a sect, a particular brand of faith, right? So they each wanted to be the one who had the true spot, who was the most pious and worthy of having the temple, or whose sect had the right answer. Another good reason to kill someone, at least statistically, right? I mean, it's not, as some people portray, that all violence has eventually go back to religion. That's not true. But we do know historically that religion has often led to quite a number of very painful deaths. You only have to look at the 100 Years' War in Europe between Protestants and Catholics to see a huge example. But you can see it time and time again through the Muslim world, between Hindus and Muslims, the Buddhist sects that have fought over the centuries. Time and time again, people have fought and killed for the right to be number one in their faith. Why would we think the first two guys would be any different? Right? And again, what are the rabbis telling us about the worth of most of these types of fights?
It's not that important.
That it's silly. You don't murder someone for this. So yes, you fight to defend your faith, but murder someone to trump theirs? No. You stop them from destroying you, but you should never think you're so certain in your interpretation that you have the right to go and stab someone else for their interpretation. And the rabbis lived at a time period when that happened, that people were murdering each other within the Jewish world, not even talking about outside the Jewish world, when that was exactly what many people did. And they're saying that is wrong. That's as pointless as the fight between Cain and Abel. I mean, of all the things to fight about, when they owned the whole world, they're going to murder over where the temple is, as though the temple being on your territory was somehow meant I was less, that I couldn't go to it. I mean, what are you talking about? But we're not done, because there's more stuff that guys fight about.
Judah Bar Ami said they were fighting about primordial Eve.
And go ahead and do Rav Huna as well.
Rav Huna said a twin girl was born along with Abel. One said, I will take her because I am the firstborn. And the other said, I will take her because she was born with me.
Just because it's a short word, they're fighting for sex. They're fighting for women. They're fighting for the right to procreate. But really, it's not just procreation in general, because according to the Midrash, at least, each of them was born with a twin sister. And the idea here is that they're fighting over the bonus twin sister. 2 guys, 3 women, 1 murder. 2 guys, 2 women, no problem. But once that third entered the equation, all of a sudden they're willing to murder, or at least willing to fight enough to the point where passions became inflamed and murder happened. Make sense? Do we see parallels throughout history? How many fights and acts of violence have been perpetrated over our third topic? The primordial Eve, for the sake of time, we're not going to go into too much, but let's just suffice it to say there was a bonus Eve in this midrash. All right. But that's not the only interpretation. And so we get the Bereishit Rabbah, basically the 3 main things that people are likely to fight over and still fight over, and trying to discount them. But there are other interpretations about what they were fighting over as well. And so we're going to go ahead and continue.
Since the Torah does not elaborate Cain's words.
Remember that? Back on our verse 8. Cain said to his brother Abel, ... And when they were in the field, Cain killed him. So what's the ... First interpretation is,
he must have told his brother about what God had said to him.
right, basic, close reading. If the Torah chose not to tell us what he said, he must have simply repeated what God had just finished saying to him in the sentence before. Right? And God said to Cain, blah, 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 don't sin, waiting at the door, etc., etc. And Cain said to his brother the same thing. You know what God just said to me? You know what God just said to me?
He made it plain to his brother that he was very upset that God had not accepted his offering as he had Abel's. Abel reacted to God having criticized Cain with joy. When Cain saw that his brother had been glad that he had been criticized by God, he rose to kill him.
So, according to Da'at K'nim, why did he kill his brother?
Because of his brother's reaction.
Because his brother was a jerk. Right? Abel was smug.
Rubbed his face in it.
He rubbed his face in it. So your brother comes to you and says, I'm so upset, face fallen, all of that, why are you so upset? Well, God told me that my offering wasn't good enough and that sin is just waiting at the door. And he says, oh, so God liked my offering better than yours. Score one for me. Yeah, a little fist pump, and Cain goes, you smug, sanctimonious, and murder happens.
Sounds like Joseph and his brothers.
Sounds like Joseph and his brothers, yes. And the smugness between brothers this is not an isolated case, nor do we only see it in the Bible. But the idea of creating jealousy, what Hebrew and Judaism eventually calls ayin hara, the evil eye, goes all the way back to the beginning. And indeed, many of the customs in Judaism are designed, when we say to avoid the evil eye, are not avoiding some gypsy's curse kind of evil eye. They are avoiding the resentment that other people have towards us because of our good fortune, because of our success. It's not rubbing other people's faces in it, not bragging about things, not showing off, not being ostentatious or flamboyant, or just not being smug. Not because they're excused for attacking me because I was smug, but because I don't want to be attacked. Of course, it's wrong for them to attack me for being smug. But it's also stupid of me to be smug and open myself up to attack. Make sense? Okay. If it makes so much sense to this room, I wish the rest of the world would get the picture too. You hear that, world? Stop being smug.
We need to understand why these scholars in the Midrash offer so many differing views as to what Cain and Abel fought about.
All right. Sorry, go ahead. One more line. Sorry.
In the commentaries dealing with the mystical dimension of the Torah, we find even more opinions.
All right. So we're not going to get to his whole commentary because it's a bit long. But why do we have so much disagreement about what they were fighting about? Why would the Midrashim bring? We've already had 4 just here, and trust me, there's a lot more in the rest of the Midrashic collections. Why bring so many different interpretations about what these poor 2 guys were fighting about? What value is it to us? Anyone? Just the rabbis like making fairy tales? The rabbis like telling different stories? They like arguing with each other?
The fact that this dynamic can play out in several different ways, all of which can lead to the same horrible result.
Exactly right. They want every reader to read the story of Cain and Abel and see their own obsession, flaws, desires, sins of temptation as playing out in this story. Right? That they are basically saying that God deliberately left that what were they arguing about question open, the ... what was said in the field, so that we could project into that field our own conflicts, so that we would all be Cain and Abel. Because we've all fought over something at some point, or we've all felt like fighting over something at some point. And if we had said, and they were fighting over the land, then everyone who's never fought over land wouldn't feel themselves in that field. If they said they were fighting over women, everyone who's never fought over a woman wouldn't feel like they were in that field. But by leaving it deliberately ambiguous, And by then filling it in with all the different possibilities of what people fight over, Cain and Abel becomes all of us. And every fight is Cain and Abel's fight, and every murder is as pointless as Cain and Abel's murder. There's nobody who can say, well, yeah, Cain was wrong to murder his brother over a piece of land, but I am absolutely justified in murdering him over where the temple will be built. You don't get to say that, because every single explanation for murdering someone has been taken off the table as valid by leaving it open. And we're going to throw in another option of why they were fighting. For good measure, Radak wants to provide another one. This is actually taken from one of the Targums, one of the early translations of the Torah.
Others say that Cain said to his brother, "There is no justice and no judge in the universe, that there is no afterlife, neither is there a reward or punishment. If there were, why would God have rejected my offering and accepted yours?"
Thank you for putting in the why, accepted yours. Right, so what's he saying? Why were they fighting? What's Cain's theological position?
There is no God.
There is no God. I know there's no God because God didn't accept mine. If there was a just God, then God would have been perfectly fine with the rubbish that I offered as a sacrifice. And since God wasn't, God isn't. It's a very common position. I can't believe in a God who, ... so now I'm an atheist. Right? By defining God in a particular way, usually because we're upset with some feature of the world, more often than not that was created by humanity rather than by God, we can then reject the notion of God entirely. And Cain seems to be taking that road, according to this early commentary. And his brother, who was favored, has a slightly different opinion.
Abel disagreed, saying, "There is a judge, there is justice, there is reward and punishment, and there is an afterlife beyond the material physical world we live in. The world was created as an act of love, not, as you believe, without love. Proof is the very fact that my offering had been accepted, seeing that I served my Creator faithfully."
Okay, so Abel's response? No, I believe there is a God, a very nice, loving God. What's my proof? God liked my sacrifice. Right? So those who feel blessed will believe in God. Those who don't feel blessed will reject God. But what happened at the very end of the very end of Abel's lovely declaration of a belief in God? What's his proof?
That the sacrifice had been accepted.
Whose?
His.
His. I know there's a God because God likes me. And Radak points out,
Seeing that their argument had become not merely philosophical but personal, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him.
right, they were doing okay. Arguing about, is there an afterlife? Is there not an afterlife? Is there reward? Is there not punishment? But as soon as you said the proof that God exists is how wonderful my life is, now you've made it personal. Because now you've said, you're bad. I'm right, you're wrong, we can argue about that. I'm good, you're bad. Now you've made it personal. Now we're not just arguing philosophical points. Now you're telling me that I am worthless compared to you. And that's the kind of thing that makes a person angry. It's the kind of thing that might make you want to kill someone. You know, that is not an easy thing to hear. And how often do we hear arguments that should be about policy or philosophy that become all about the person rather than the proposal? I don't think we have to go too far through the headlines to find examples. It's pretty much all of them go personal very, very quickly. And when we are challenged for our philosophy or our views or our opinions or our policy recommendations, how quickly do we feel that we've been personally attacked and insulted just because a person disagrees with a policy that we happen to like? We take it very personally, very fast. I should point out, it's no coincidence, however, that Radak is putting the words of there is no reward, there is no punishment, there is no judge into the mouth of the murderer. Because if you truly believe there is no afterlife, there is no reward, there is no punishment, then if there's no one else around in the world to put you in jail, why wouldn't you murder this person? Right? It's pretty easy. If there is no police, there is no army, there is no justice in this world, and there is no justice in the next world, then I might as well make my own justice between just us. Sorry. Okay. Had to get a little bit of a chuckle in there after this. Yes, that was a rough joke. Onward. And don't worry, there is justice. I will be punished for that joke, I'm sure.
The word crouches is in the infinitive to underline that sin is a constant peril, an obstacle waiting to trip you up. It awaits you both coming and going.
Right, when it says sitting, crouching at the door, it's used in this very specific infinitive construct form in the Hebrew. Sorry for the grammar again. And Radak is saying that means it is constantly there waiting. It is constantly waiting there to trip when you're coming or going. Remember, it's at the door. That's the imagery. No matter whether you're coming or going, there's always the potential to trip.
Did you notice that crouches is misspelled in the JPS translation?
Is it?
Couches.
Oh, yeah, it's in couches at the door. I wonder if do they mean couch in the sense of like couched in there is an old usage of that word. Couched in certain words, to mean sort of hidden or laying in wait. But crouch sounds better, I think.
Radak thinks it means practice.
Yeah, well, this translation of Radak. Radak didn't know English so well. So rovetz can mean to lie in wait for, to be poised for ambush, is kind of what the word means. So, but the idea here is, of course, that particular form is the infinitive, meaning that it is always ready. Not that infinitive always means always, but that's what it means in this particular Hebrew section. All right, onward. But the great thing is that we have commentators that try to tell us what to do about this problem, right? Because we all have these and other issues that we've talked about that might make us want to strangle someone, that might make us want to fight or say things that are rude or be an adversary to someone or to attack or take attacks personally. But that is the problem, right? That's what's crouching at the door, is all of that likelihood, that temptation, that predilection, that proclivity. How do we fix it? How do we avoid it? How do we keep the spider's thread from becoming the rope cord? And that's what Radak is going to give us more of.
It will have control over you only if you do not actively remove it from your presence. If you want to, you can control it, govern it, resulting in your humbling it before you. By saying these words, God demonstrated to Cain the immense power inherent in his possessing free choice. Moses repeated this thought at the end of his life, when in his parting speech he said to the Jewish people in Deuteronomy, "See here, I have placed before you this day life and the good, or death and the evil." Moses added the admonition, "Choose the life."
Choose life. Right, so if you want to know how to defeat sin, first of all, you have to recognize that you can. One of the most important messages in all of Torah, right there at the beginning for all of humanity, not just for Jews, but for all of humanity, is that we have the capacity to be the master of sin. Now, you might think that's a little weird, because what was the major story in the previous chapter?
Sin.
We couldn't say no to a piece of fruit, right? If we couldn't say no to a worthless piece of fruit, well, I mean, it was worth something, but a worthless piece of fruit hanging from a tree, when real stakes are on the line, surely we're all likely to fail. And yet this story comes immediately after the expulsion to say, even for the most important things in life, or at least the things we become most passionate about, you are in control and you are responsible for your actions and you can avoid the sin.
Yeah. One of the aspects of addiction, addiction recovery in terms of 12 steps, is that resentment is a road to relapse. So i.e., I resent the fact I can't eat that fruit. I resent the fact that the Lord did not accept my sacrifice.
Right.
As contrasted.
It's the thin thread that
Right.
leads to the rope. Yeah.
As contrasted with gratitude.
Mm.
I'm so grateful I have all these other things I can eat.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm so grateful that the Lord has given me feedback so I can improve
Exactly.
my performance. That it's the same scenarios,
right,
but a different perspective
right,
that really are antagonistic to one another.
And the reaction makes all the difference,
right?
Because the temptation to escalate, which is what's being described here, is just waiting for the opportunity.
Right.
And as long as you go out the other door, it's going to be much easier to go in the right direction, which is Sforno is going to give us it made even more clearly of why we have this power.
If you improve yourself, you will also be welcome in my eyes,
said God to Cain. Right? It's not that I don't like you.
Right.
I'm just waiting for you to get it right.
Every lofty level of greatness is lying in wait for you, ready to become yours. However, sin is also lying in wait for you, if you will add further intentional sin to the already performed unintentional sin. It is within your power to overcome the power of the evil urge, thanks to the divine image with which you have been provided at birth. This conforms to our sages who have taught that were it not for this divine image, which represents God's assistance against the evil urge, there would be no way man could cope with temptation.
Right, so for all those medieval artists who took that we were made B'Tselem Elohim as art direction for what they should paint God to look like, this, according to one of our great commentators, is what it means that we were made B'Tselem Elohim. It means we were made with the ability to choose between good and bad. That we have that capacity, where we're not an animal that's governed by instinct and impulse, but that we have those impulses and instincts in order to drive us in many good directions, as long as we're willing to keep our hands on the reins. And as long as we're willing to look with the right perspective and react in the proper way to all of the issues that can come around us. Right? That we have that capacity. And Cain's failure isn't proof of our sinfulness, it's just proof of the difficulty. And it's proof of the problem that can arise. Right? It's not supposed to be a tale of, see, there goes humanity again. It's supposed to be a tale of, next time we'll get it right. Next time we'll get it right. Because we finished with the most powerful line from Sifrei, one of the early Midrash collections. If you remember only one thing, remember this.
If you wish, you will overpower sin.
That's it. That's the story of Cain and Abel. Right? If you want to avoid it, you can. You are stronger than the temptations. It is the thief that is decrepit, that all you have to do is pull back the cloak and realize it's a straw man. It's a scarecrow. We are made B'Tselem Elohim. We are made in the image of God. Our temptations are not. Which is the stronger force? Right? So don't take Cain's failure as being proof of our inability. It's just proof that he failed at that moment. We all have our own potential for failure, and we probably all have failed from time to time. You fix it, and you do better next time. So critical that this story came after the expulsion. Right? We are inherent from start to finish capable of great things. As long as we just check the door when we open it. Okay, take care, everyone. Keep studying.
Thank you.
And Paul, yes, I'll get your Torah reading for you.
Thank you, Rabbi.